There comes a moment in life when you finally realize that walking away isn't losing. It is winning your freedom back. They thought you were angry. They thought you were bitter. They thought you were sitting somewhere replaying everything they did, waiting for an apology, waiting for revenge, or hoping they would come back. But they misunderstood you completely. You weren't mad anymore. You were free. Free from the endless explanations, free from the emotional games, free from the disappointment, free from constantly wondering why people treated you the way they did. And the moment you stopped reacting, they started noticing. Your silence became louder than your arguments ever were. Your peace became more powerful than your pain. You stopped trying to convince people of your worth, because you finally understood that your worth was never determined by how they treated you. You didn't walk away because you hated them. You walked away because you finally loved yourself enough to stop returning to what was breaking your spirit. Now they are looking at you differently because they can see the transformation. You're not chasing, you're not begging, you're not explaining, and you're not seeking permission to move forward. You're simply living, and that is what they never expected. They thought losing them would destroy you, but losing them gave you room to discover yourself again. Today, you're going to understand why your freedom became the one thing they could never control, why your peace became the evidence that you had truly moved on, and why the moment you stopped being emotionally available to their chaos was the moment they finally realized they no longer had power over you. This is not about revenge. This is about release. This is about choosing peace over conflict, purpose over distraction, and your future over a past that no longer deserves your energy. They thought you were mad, but the truth is, you were finally free. There is a powerful kind of silence that appears when a person has finally healed enough to stop explaining themselves. It is not the silence of defeat, resentment, or hidden anger. It is the silence of someone who has finally understood that peace is more valuable than being heard by people who deliberately refuse to listen. They looked at your quietness and assumed you were angry. They saw you stepping back and thought you were plotting something. They noticed that you stopped calling, stopped checking in, stopped defending yourself, and stopped responding to every little provocation. And they convinced themselves that you were still emotionally trapped in what happened. But they were wrong. You weren't angry anymore. You were finally free. There is a tremendous difference between walking away because you hate someone and walking away because you have finally realized that you deserve peace. Hatred still creates a connection. Anger still gives someone space inside your mind. But freedom is different. Freedom is when their behavior no longer determines your mood. Freedom is when their opinion no longer controls your confidence. Freedom is when their absence no longer feels like punishment, because you have discovered that your life can continue beautifully without their presence. That is where you are beginning to stand now. You are not trying to make them jealous. You are not trying to prove that you can survive without them. You are simply living your life without constantly looking over your shoulder. And that realization can be shocking to people who became comfortable with having access to your emotions. They may have become accustomed to seeing you react. If they disappointed you, they expected a reaction. If they ignored you, they expected you to chase. If they accused you, they expected you to defend yourself. If they hurt you, they expected you to explain why you were hurt. They learned how to push certain buttons because they knew those buttons worked. But something changed when you stopped giving them the reaction they were expecting. You didn't become cold. You became conscious. You realized that every reaction does not deserve your energy. You realized that some conversations are designed to keep you trapped rather than help you heal. You realized that constantly explaining your heart to someone committed to misunderstanding you is exhausting. So you chose silence, not because you had nothing to say, but because you finally understood that everything did not need to be said. Your silence became a boundary. Your distance became protection. Your peace became your answer. And perhaps the most beautiful part is that you don't need them to understand your transformation for it to be real. You don't need them to admit that they were wrong. You don't need them to apologize before you can move forward. You don't need them to recognize how much you have changed. Sometimes closure doesn't come through a conversation. Sometimes closure arrives quietly when you wake up one morning and realize you no longer feel the need to have that conversation at all. You remember what happened, but it no longer controls you. You remember their words, but those words no longer define you. You remember the disappointment, but you no longer build your future around it. That is freedom. And when they eventually notice that you have changed, they may wonder what happened. They may think someone else changed you. They may believe you became distant because you are trying to punish them. But the truth is much simpler. You finally became tired of abandoning yourself just to keep other people comfortable. You discovered that peace sometimes requires distance. You discovered that protecting your heart doesn't mean becoming heartless. You discovered that forgiveness does not always require renewed access. You can release anger without reopening the door. You can wish someone well without inviting them back into your life. You can appreciate the lessons without returning to the situation that taught them. And that is exactly why your silence carries such power now. It isn't screaming for attention. It isn't demanding recognition. It isn't asking anyone to feel sorry for you. It simply says, I have chosen myself. The people who expected you to remain emotionally connected to the past may eventually realize that the version of you they once knew is gone. Not because you became someone fake, but because you finally became someone whole. You no longer need chaos to feel alive. You no longer need confrontation to feel powerful. You no longer need revenge to feel victorious. Your victory is waking up with peace in your heart. Your victory is moving forward without bitterness. Your victory is building a life so meaningful that the people who once occupied your thoughts become nothing more than chapters you have already finished reading. So let them wonder why you are quiet. Let them misunderstand your distance. Let them create their own explanations. You don't have to interrupt them. You know the truth. You weren't mad. You were exhausted from carrying what was never yours. You weren't trying to hurt them. You were trying to heal yourself. You weren't disappearing to make them chase you. You were stepping away because you finally realized that your freedom was worth protecting. And once you experience that kind of freedom, you stop begging for the doors that close behind you because you become too focused on the doors God is opening in front of you. There comes a point in your journey when you become exhausted from carrying burdens that were never assigned to you in the first place. You spent so much time trying to understand other people's behavior, fixing situations you didn't break, apologizing for things you didn't do, and taking responsibility for emotions that belonged to someone else. You carried their disappointment as though it were your responsibility. You carried their accusations as though you had to prove your innocence every day. You carried their rejection as though it meant something was wrong with you. You carried conversations in your mind long after they ended, replaying every word and wondering what you could have said differently. But eventually, something inside you changed. You realized that you cannot heal while continuously carrying everyone else's version of the story. You cannot walk into a new season while dragging the weight of an old one behind you. And perhaps that is the freedom they never expected you to discover. You finally stopped carrying what was never yours to carry. For a long time, you may have believed that keeping peace meant accepting blame. You thought being understanding meant tolerating everything. You thought being loving meant constantly making excuses for people who repeatedly hurt you. You thought patience meant waiting indefinitely for someone to become the person you hoped they would be. But wisdom taught you something different. Real love does not require you to destroy yourself. Compassion does not mean having no boundaries. Forgiveness does not mean volunteering to be wounded by the same person repeatedly. And understanding someone's pain does not mean you have to become responsible for their choices. You began separating what belonged to you from what belonged to them. Your mistakes belonged to you, and you were willing to learn from them. Your growth belonged to you, and you embraced it. Your future belonged to you, and you decided to protect it. But their decisions, their dishonesty, their insecurity, their jealousy, their anger, and their unwillingness to change were never yours to carry. Once you understood that, something extraordinary happened. Your heart became lighter. You stopped waking up, wondering how to make everyone happy. You stopped measuring your worth by whether someone accepted you. You stopped trying to convince people that your intentions were good. You stopped chasing people who only valued you when you were useful to them. You stopped explaining yourself to people who had already decided what they wanted to believe. And that doesn't mean you suddenly stopped caring. It means you finally started caring about yourself too. There is a tremendous difference between selfishness and self-respect. Selfishness says, only I matter. Self-respect says, I matter too. You learned that your needs were not an inconvenience. Your boundaries were not cruelty. Your desire for peace was not weakness. Your decision to leave unhealthy situations was not betrayal. You began realizing that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is stop participating in something that continuously steals your peace. And when you did that, people who were accustomed to receiving your unlimited energy may have been confused. They may have asked why you changed. They may have wondered why you no longer reacted the way you used to. But you didn't change overnight. You simply reached the end of a long emotional journey. Every disappointment taught you something. Every betrayal showed you something. Every unanswered question pushed you closer to understanding yourself. Every moment you cried alone prepared you to become stronger without needing an audience. You weren't becoming heartless. You were becoming disciplined with your heart. You were learning where to invest your energy and where to stop pouring into empty spaces. You were learning that not everyone deserves an explanation. Not every conflict deserves your response, and not every relationship deserves unlimited access to your life. Most importantly, you began releasing the guilt that kept you connected to the past. You stopped asking, "Was I enough?" and started asking, "Was this healthy for me?" You stopped asking, "Why didn't they choose me?" and started asking, "Why was I willing to abandon myself just to be chosen?" Those questions changed everything. They moved your attention from their behavior to your future. They moved you from victimhood toward responsibility. Not responsibility for what happened to you, but responsibility for what you choose to do next. You cannot control what someone did yesterday, but you can decide what you carry into tomorrow. And sometimes healing means putting down the emotional suitcase you have been dragging from one season into another. Put down the need to be understood by everyone. Put down the guilt that never belonged to you. Put down the fear of disappointing people who were comfortable disappointing you. Put down the responsibility of fixing people who refuse to fix themselves. Put down the endless search for closure from people who may never provide it. You are allowed to move forward without receiving every answer. You are allowed to close a chapter without receiving an apology. You are allowed to become peaceful, even when someone else remains angry. Your future does not require their permission. Your healing does not require their agreement. And your freedom does not depend on whether they finally understand what they lost. One day, they may look at you and realize that you are no longer carrying the same weight. They may see a calmness in you that wasn't there before. They may notice that you don't defend yourself constantly anymore. They may wonder why you seem lighter. The answer is simple. You stopped carrying what was never yours. You returned every burden to its rightful owner and chose to carry only what God placed in your hands. And now you can walk forward with your head lifted, your heart protected, and your spirit free, because you finally understand that sometimes the greatest breakthrough is not receiving something new. It is releasing what was never meant to stay with you. There comes a moment in your life when you stop asking people to validate the decisions that God has already given you the courage to make. For so long, you may have measured your happiness by how other people responded to you. If they approved, you felt confident. If they rejected you, you questioned yourself. If they praised you, you felt worthy. If they criticized you, you wondered whether you had done something wrong. You became accustomed to checking the faces around you before trusting the voice within you. But something changed. Somewhere along the journey, you discovered that peace is worth more than approval, and that realization completely transformed the way you move through life. You began understanding that you can be misunderstood and still be right about what you need. You can be criticized and still choose peace. You can disappoint someone and still make the correct decision for your life. You can walk away from a relationship, friendship, environment, or situation without needing everyone to agree with your reasons. That is maturity. That is freedom. And that is why the people who once believed they could control your emotions are now confused by the person you have become. They remember the version of you who explained everything. They remember the version of you who desperately wanted to be understood. They remember how quickly you responded whenever someone questioned your intentions. But now they see someone different. You are no longer interested in winning every argument because you have discovered that some victories are not worth the cost of your peace. You no longer need to prove that you were right because your life is becoming the evidence. You no longer chase approval because you finally recognize that approval from the wrong people can become a prison. Think about how exhausting it is to constantly perform for people who have already decided how they want to see you. You can give your best, and they can still criticize you. You can love them sincerely, and they can still misunderstand you. You can sacrifice for them, and they can still complain about what you didn't do. If you build your identity around their opinions, you will spend your entire life trying to reach a standard that keeps moving. But when you choose peace, you step out of that exhausting cycle. You stop asking, "What will they think?" and begin asking, "What is right for me?" You stop asking, "Will they understand?" and start asking, will this decision protect my peace and my purpose? Those questions create a completely different life. You begin making decisions from wisdom rather than fear. You stop staying in places simply because leaving might upset someone. You stop saying yes when your heart is screaming no. You stop shrinking yourself so someone else can remain comfortable. And you realize that boundaries are not walls designed to punish people. They are doors that teach others how to approach you with respect. Your peace becomes sacred. You become more selective about what you listen to, what you entertain, what you respond to, and what you allow into your spirit. Not because you think you are better than anyone, but because you finally understand how precious your emotional energy is. You have learned that one toxic conversation can steal hours of peace, while one wise decision can protect months of progress. You have learned that not every accusation deserves a defense, and not every rumor deserves a response. Sometimes silence is more powerful than explanation because silence says, I know who I am, and I don't need to convince you. This doesn't mean you never make mistakes. You still reflect. You still apologize when you are wrong. You still learn. But you no longer allow someone's disappointment to automatically become your guilt. You can listen without surrendering your identity. You can receive advice without giving away your authority over your own life. You can respect someone without allowing them to control you. And that is a powerful kind of freedom. Perhaps the people who once had influence over you are beginning to notice that their approval no longer determines your direction. They may try to provoke you. They may question your choices. They may remind you of your past. They may even attempt to make you feel guilty for changing. But you don't have to return to the old version of yourself just because someone is uncomfortable with the new one. Growth often makes people uncomfortable because your boundaries remove privileges they never should have had. When you stop accepting disrespect, someone who benefited from your silence may call you difficult. When you stop chasing someone, they may call you cold. When you stop explaining yourself, they may say you have changed. And perhaps you have changed, but not into someone worse. You changed into someone who finally understands their value. Your peace is not arrogance. Your boundaries are not hatred. Your independence is not revenge. Your silence is not weakness. It is evidence that you have matured beyond the need to be accepted by everyone. There will always be people who misunderstand you, and there will always be people who criticize choices they don't have the courage to make themselves. Let them. You don't need to interrupt every misunderstanding. You don't need to correct every opinion. You don't need to attend every argument you are invited to. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is keep walking, keep building, keep praying, keep becoming. Let your character speak where your words cannot. Let your consistency answer questions you are tired of explaining. Let your peace become the proof that you made the right decision. Because eventually, you realize something extraordinary. Approval can make you feel accepted for a moment, but peace allows you to live authentically for a lifetime. And once you have experienced the freedom of choosing peace over approval, you will never again willingly trade your inner calm just to keep someone else comfortable. You were not placed on this earth to spend your life convincing everyone that you are worthy. You were created to walk boldly into the purpose God placed within you. So breathe deeply, release the opinions that were never yours to carry, and keep moving forward. Let them think what they want. Let them misunderstand. Let them talk. You know your heart. God knows your heart. And when your peace becomes more important than their approval, you discover that you were never truly free until you stopped needing permission to be yourself. There is a moment when people finally realize that your absence was never a threat. It was a consequence. They thought you would always be there. They became comfortable with your patience, your kindness, your forgiveness, and your willingness to give one more chance. Assume that no matter how many times they disappointed you, you would eventually return. No matter how deeply they hurt you, you would eventually forgive them. No matter how far they pushed you away, they believed you would still leave the door open. But they misunderstood the strength of a person who has finally learned their worth. You did not walk away because you wanted them to chase you. You walked away because you were tired of chasing peace inside places that constantly disturbed it. There is a profound difference between leaving someone to punish them and leaving because you finally understand that staying is costing you too much. You weren't trying to make them feel your absence. You were trying to feel your own presence again. For a long time, you gave people access to parts of you that they had not earned. You gave explanations when you deserved understanding. You offered forgiveness before they demonstrated change. You gave chances to people who treated those chances like guarantees. You stayed available because you believed loyalty meant never giving up on someone. But eventually, you discovered that loyalty without boundaries can become self-abandonment. You realize that loving someone does not mean allowing them unlimited opportunities to hurt you. You realize that forgiveness does not require you to return to the same environment that broke your peace. You realize that sometimes the healthiest goodbye is the one you don't announce. You simply stop participating. You stop explaining. You stop chasing. You stop responding to the same cycle. And suddenly the dynamic changes. The person who once assumed you would always be available begins noticing your absence. They reach for the attention that used to come so easily and discover that it is no longer there. They look for the version of you who would immediately answer, but that version has grown. They expect an emotional reaction, but you give them calm. They expect you to argue, but you choose silence. They expect you to defend yourself, but you choose peace. They may initially interpret this as anger, but eventually they begin to understand that something much deeper has happened. You have detached from the need for their validation. You are no longer waiting for them to become different. You are no longer negotiating with behavior that has already shown you what it is. You have accepted the truth, and acceptance is powerful, because once you accept reality, you stop wasting energy trying to make reality something else. Maybe they never realized how much of your heart was involved. Maybe they thought your patience meant weakness. Maybe they believed your kindness made you easy to manipulate. But your kindness was never weakness. Your willingness to forgive was never stupidity. Your patience was never permission to disrespect you. You were simply giving people opportunities to show you who they truly were. And when they repeatedly chose the same behavior, you finally believed what they were showing you. That is when you stopped arguing with reality. You stopped saying, maybe this time will be different. You started saying, I have seen enough. That sentence can change your entire life. Because when you have seen enough, you don't need another explanation. You don't need another broken promise. You don't need another dramatic conversation. You don't need another apology that disappears when the next opportunity for disrespect arrives. You simply move differently. You protect your heart differently. You choose relationships differently. You understand that access to you is not an entitlement. It is a privilege created through trust, respect, consistency, and genuine care. And when those things disappear, your distance becomes natural. This is why your freedom may have shocked them. They expected you to collapse without them, but you began rebuilding. They expected you to chase them, but you began chasing your purpose. They expected you to remain stuck in the past, but you started creating a future they were no longer part of. They thought your life would become smaller without their presence, but somehow your world became bigger. You found new peace. You rediscovered your confidence. You started laughing again. You started sleeping better. You started thinking about dreams you had forgotten while trying to keep unhealthy relationships alive. And perhaps the greatest realization was this: you didn't lose yourself when you lost them. You found yourself. Sometimes the people who leave your life create the space necessary for you to meet the person you were always meant to become. That's why you don't have to feel guilty about moving forward. You don't have to apologize for protecting your peace. You don't have to reopen doors simply because someone finally regrets walking away from you. Their regret is theirs to carry. Your healing is yours to protect. If they eventually understand that losing access to you was the consequence of how they treated you, let that understanding belong to them. You don't need to celebrate it. You don't need revenge. You don't need to make them suffer. You simply continue living, continue growing, continue becoming stronger, continue walking with God. Because your greatest victory isn't watching someone regret losing you. Your greatest victory is reaching the point where the regret no longer determines your happiness. You are free when their absence doesn't frighten you. You are healed when their return doesn't tempt you to abandon your boundaries. You are strong when you can wish them well without inviting them back into your life. And you are truly victorious when you realize that sometimes losing access to you is not something you need to explain. It is simply the natural consequence of failing to value what you were given. There is a moment when you look back at everything you survived and realize something extraordinary. You were never as broken as they wanted you to believe. You were wounded, yes. You were disappointed. You were exhausted. There were nights when you questioned yourself, mornings when getting up felt difficult, and moments when you wondered whether the pain would ever end. But you kept going. Even when your heart was tired, you kept moving. Even when people walked away, You continued building. Even when others misunderstood you, you refused to let their opinions become the definition of your life. And now, something beautiful is happening. Your life is becoming evidence that the chapter they thought would destroy you actually became the chapter that transformed you. They may remember the version of you who cried, struggled, doubted, and needed time to recover. But they don't get to define you by the season in which you were hurting. They don't get to look at your scars and call you weak. They don't get to measure your future by your past, because you are no longer standing where they left you. You have moved forward, and your new life is quietly speaking for you. You don't have to announce your healing. You don't have to tell everyone how much stronger you've become. You don't have to prove that you survived. Your peace proves it. Your confidence proves it. Your ability to smile again proves it. The way you walk away from unnecessary drama proves it. The way you protect your time, your energy, and your heart proves it. The life you are building is the testimony, and perhaps that is what surprises them most. They expected you to remain emotionally attached to the pain. They expected your memories to keep you trapped. They thought you would spend years asking why they did what they did. But you eventually stopped looking for answers in people who could never give you peace. You started looking toward God, toward purpose, toward growth, and toward the future. You realized that sometimes the answer isn't found in understanding why someone hurt you. Sometimes the answer is found in discovering who you became because you survived it. You became wiser. You became more discerning. You learned to recognize patterns. You learned that not every smile represents friendship, and not every apology represents change. You learned that people can say beautiful words while producing painful behavior. Most importantly, you learned to trust actions more than promises. These lessons didn't come cheaply, but they became part of your strength. Your pain taught you boundaries. Your disappointment taught you discernment. Your loneliness taught you independence. Your rejection taught you that being rejected by someone does not mean you are unworthy of love. Your betrayal taught you that trust should be built through consistency, not demanded through words. And now you are walking differently because you know something you didn't know before. You can survive losing people you once thought you couldn't live without. That realization is powerful. It means you no longer have to cling to relationships out of fear. You can choose relationships from wisdom. You can love without losing yourself. You can forgive without forgetting the lesson. You can care without becoming controlled. You can walk away without becoming bitter. And you can move forward without needing anyone from your past to approve of the person you have become. There will always be people who remember your old version and try to pull you back into it. They may say, "You've changed," and your answer doesn't need to be defensive. Yes, you have changed. You were supposed to. Growth changes you. Healing changes you. Wisdom changes you. God changes you. You cannot go through fire and remain exactly the same person who entered it. The pain may have introduced you to parts of yourself you never knew existed. It revealed your strength. It exposed your resilience. It taught you what you will and will not tolerate. It showed you that your peace is priceless. And now your life is becoming bigger than the people who once made you feel small. You are dreaming again. You are planning again. You are believing again. You are laughing without forcing it. You are enjoying moments without wondering who is going to ruin them. You are learning to wake up without carrying yesterday into today. That is healing. Healing doesn't mean you forget everything. It means the memories no longer control your direction. You can remember what happened without returning to it. You can acknowledge the pain without living inside it. You can honor your past without allowing it to become your identity. And when people from your past eventually look at you, they may wonder how you became so peaceful. They may wonder why you no longer seem angry. They may wonder why you don't need their apology anymore. The answer is simple.